Well, speaking of money, government waste of taxpayer dollars surging to disturbing numbers. The newly released Congressional Pig Book, we take a look at it every year. Well, it shows $15.3 billion. $15.3 billion will be spent on earmarks during the 2019 fiscal year. A contributor at The Hill, Kristin Tate, is here to break down some of the most outrageous misspending that is being exposed. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Heather.
Well, let's begin with a big one. $65 million for something called the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund.
Right, pretty crazy, right? When politicians talk about government spending, what we often hear about most is waste and abuse. But when it comes time to line up at the spending trough, politicians on both sides of the aisle are more than happy to spend our tax dollars on these kinds of seemingly absurd and random spending items.
Another one is $13.8 million for the Wild Horse and Burro program.
Yeah, another one that just seems kind of random, right? And this is all thanks to earmarking. And for people at home who might not know what earmarks are, they're essentially pork added to appropriations bills. And these pork barrel projects often have nothing to do with the original legislation. And they basically allow members of Congress to funnel tax dollars to these like pet projects back in their home districts. So that's how we end up with these absurd expenditures that are really insulting to taxpayers.
And favors being handed out in their home districts as well. Here's another one, $12 million for an aquatic plant control program.
I don't even think anyone can tell us what that even means. I mean, some of this stuff is so absurd, and earmarking in the past has forced us taxpayers to foot the bills for things like $500,000 on a teapot museum in North Carolina, or $200,000 on a tattoo removal program in California. Earmarking is really bad because it incentivizes members of Congress to vote for these massive spending bills in exchange for relatively small earmarks that could total a few $1,000,000 or even just a few $1,000s.
Yeah, and we all remember the shrimp running on the treadmill incident, and they sneak these things in too, because they're not talking about shrimp this time around. They're talking about fruit flies instead. $9 million for the fruit fly quarantine program.
That's right. And they hope that many of us won't notice. And sadly, many members of the public don't. Way back in 1822, James Monroe wrote to Congress that congressional spending authority should be limited to great national works. He said that if, the spending authority became relatively unlimited, it would be subject to waste and abuse. Well, here we are nearly 200 years later, and these earmarks continue to corrupt Congress and really erode trust in Washington, D.C. And as you know, Heather, just federal spending in general has ballooned to new heights. We're $21 trillion in debt, and there really seems to be nobody left in Washington, D.C. who's willing to get serious about spending cuts.
Both sides of the aisle. You've got a great piece in The Hill, and so if people want more information, they can look for it there. Thank you so much, Kristin.
Thank you, Heather.